When the Kenway games first released, they already simplified parkour, reducing and consolidating the amount of modifier buttons the player had access to from the previous games. This makes a game like Black Flag an acceptable one to remake, using the new Origins-based movement paradigm as a foundation, especially because they can take inspiration from how Mirage did its stuff. But even this is about as far back as that foundation can stretch before collapsing into being unusable. Mirage did its best, Shadows made some wonderful improvements. Assassin's Creed parkour still has difficulties though, even in games like Mirage that are very city heavy. I don't think games like Resynced have a hope of overcoming this fatal conclusion either. Let me explain why modifier buttons matter, what they do, what they provide that the current system will never achieve, even if the best developers in the world eventually make this current control scheme literally perfect. To start, this modern AC parkour foundation as it functions and as it's used by the player started in Origins. It eventually added a sprint toggle in Valhalla, which later games inherited along with all of its problems and consequences. This sprint toggle button is smoke and mirrors. It is also actively evil and harms the improvement of Assassin's Creed as a game series. This sprint button mostly serves to hide the sinister nature of modern AC movement from players who give it the benefit of the doubt, who put their hope and faith into these games, eventually improving parkour to give them the level of control they desire. But it won't. Ever. The sprint button is a cloak that hides something from players, that no matter how you dress it up, it doesn't actually do anything, because the fundamental base of modern AC movement does not account for whether the player is sprinting or not, and even if it did, it would be dysfunctional, insufficient, and unreliable. Why? One reason is that at a foundational level, toggling sprint on and off is not a reliable or readable action. A second reason is that in Assassin's Creed, a player will not always be in motion. Once, Assassin's Creed had a reliable mechanism that took both of these factors into account, but it currently does not. So, one at a time. Firstly, toggling between sprinting and not sprinting. In this current system, this is extremely uncomfortable, and it's not responsive in the same way that holding and releasing a trigger or shoulder button is. You can test this for yourself right now, and I invite you to do so, by grabbing your controller, knowing of course that AC is a series developed primarily for controllers as its preferred input device. If you're on keyboard, you have other issues entirely. Anyway, grab your controller and press and release R1 a bunch of times really fast. Now do the same with R2 a bunch of times really fast. Now, still holding your controller, click your left stick over and over again really fast. Which of these actions made you more tired? Which of these actions could you comfortably do thousands of times over the course of a complete playthrough? Clicking L3 on and off on rare occasions is begrudgingly acceptable, but toggling back and forth between these states at the frequency for good parkour, which took that as a modifier button into account, would be unreasonable and very harsh on the player's hands. The jump button being the only substantial modifier for upward and forward movement means it's difficult for Ubisoft to give the player fine communication over their actions, which means the game has to guess more, interpret player intention more. Guessing what you want due to this lack of hard communication is very error-prone, and these errors happen more often in situations with overlapping context and edge cases. We need another, hard, physical button, a kind of splitter button, if you will, to shift with precision what it is we're communicating to the game. In the original games, this was not only high profile, it was also legs, which Kenway games smushed into a single state, a decision that caused problems, like unintentional wall runs when cornering, or unintentional jumps while nearing edges, both being things the original games did not do when you were just holding high profile by itself. Again, if you want to, you can try this out. If you load up AC1 or the Ezio trilogy, hold high profile and run at an edge that's far off the ground. Hold high profile and run at a wall. You will not fling yourself off, and you will not accidentally wall run. You may grab the edge, but this is not a catastrophic outcome, and you may slam into the wall, but this will keep you on ground level, and it's very easy to run out of that. To avoid frustrating players through frequent misinterpretation due to the absence of the splitter button, a modern Assassin's Creed game typically chooses to exclude some useful actions entirely. When it does make them available, they're often difficult to reliably do. Often you'll accidentally get a different one or even get none at all, your character just sitting there doing nothing. This is what happens when more states have to overlap when they're all called with the same one or two buttons. It leads to various problems in programming, designing, and letting the player access different actions. The specter of L3 sprint prevents us from discussing that remapping is insufficient. Every time a new AC game comes out, players flood YouTube comments of strong parkour players, flood AC's official Twitter replies with the desperate, aching question of, can we change the controls to feel more like the older games? The reason they always ask this is not because they have trouble letting go of nostalgia. The reason they ask is because they recognize a lack that modern Assassin's Creed fails to resolve over and over and over. It cannot resolve it, no matter how hard it tries. And if you don't believe me, or you're still hopeful, in a moment I'll express why this cannot be fixed, even if and when we achieve this control scheme's best possible scenario, something that we get closer to with every release. Remapping is not enough. Letting us change sprint to a held shoulder button or trigger is not enough. And that's assuming it even works fine and doesn't interfere with casting abilities or special actions, inputs that are usually hard-coded to R2, in a blatant sign that binding sprint to a held trigger is never a real consideration or something that we're even meant to take seriously. The game isn't actually changing how it processes input and player intent for parkour actions. No matter whether you remap sprint to a trigger, a fight stick button, a mouse click, a racing wheel pedal, or a Guitar Hero lever, it doesn't matter. Even with good remapping, which games like Mirage, Shadows, and Resynced genuinely do provide, let me praise that, it's not gonna work. Rebinding and remapping do not change the reality, do not change the part that actually counts. The game can never cleanly and predictably process available actions on whether a player is sprinting or not, because it always has to default to sprint being a toggle. That's simply irresponsible to base fine, precise state changes on, especially ones targeted at a complex sea of walls, ladders, beams, and poles. The exercise I had you do with your analog stick earlier is enough to convey that, I hope. Never mind that, in older games, the run button isn't just run, it's a modifier that changes the output of other buttons you press while holding it, which is where the second reason this control scheme's life cycle is coming to an end comes in. That reason is that in older games, your modifier or splitter button modifies and splits your actions even when you're completely static on the side of a wall. If we try to imagine how this would even work with a modern system, it quickly becomes impossible or absurd to conceptualize. Imagine having to hold your left stick pressed in while hanging on a wall to decide that you do actually want to modify your next output into something specific, or even when you're sprinting around on the ground. Or we can design it a different way. That action becomes available if the player has clicked their left stick in, say, the last 5 seconds. Okay, but then what if they were already sprinting, and now you force them to turn it back off when they wanted to maintain their full speed? It's messy. Or what if the action is only available if the player is currently in sprint state? Well, again, that's not good either. A player will want access to many parkour actions when they're not necessarily moving. Maybe they're on a wall, maybe they were just observing a target from a standstill on a beam, and now they want to suddenly move again. This happens in Assassin's Creed all the time. Sprint is a state that's only visible to the player when they're in motion, and in these games, it's often not even visible and readable then. Remember, knowing whether the player is even sprinting or not is the #1 complaint players have had about these games since Valhalla, which was half a decade ago. Naue is able to cheat this because her sprint speed is so noticeably faster than her jog, but characters like Basim, Yasuke, and very clearly Edward in all this preview footage we're seeing entail a lot more fiddling, clicking, and re-clicking of L3 to figure out if you're even sprinting or not, and even then it's hard to tell. It's just not possible. We need another modifier button. If jumping is going to be done with a face button, that modifier button makes sense being a trigger or shoulder. I would love to see an Assassin's Creed game, whether that's Hexa or the one after that, take movement back to the drawing board somehow. Because you can tell that despite all the improvements over the past 10 years, this current system has its origins in a 10-year-old game named exactly that, Origins, and it is constrained by it. If you're still not convinced, let me put it a little differently, the simplest way I can. Imagine this current system we have now, but finally made literally perfect. These devs are doing everything they possibly can. You can see it, they are magicians. So many requests we make, whenever we can communicate them clearly to the dev teams, they make every single change we ask for that they are capable of. Which means that eventually, and very soon in fact, they will probably achieve, if not perfection, then as close to it as we'll get with this control scheme. So you can improve it, you can make it better, and it doesn't matter. It's not about what they're willing to do, it's that what we want is impossible of them. What we should ask for is that they be allowed to work on top of a system that makes what we need possible. It will always be constrained by its foundation. So no matter how much better you make it, you will never make it better enough to give the player genuine precision in what they're communicating to the game. Unless your argument is that those actions can be removed harmlessly and don't matter, which is an argument that would be callous, hurtful, and in urban-heavy Assassin's Creeds simply untrue. The more they improve movement, the more it starts to become interesting to think about, because What happens when they make this version of it the best it can possibly be? This version of it flawless, but it's still not what we want. What happens when parkour that uses this default control scheme becomes so good and so well developed that it can't go any further, but it still fails to let the player move how they want? It still fails to let them modify their communicated intent to the game state precisely enough to make parkour a reliable part of core gameplay, instead of a means to an end. Every open world game you can play has movement as a means to an end. Games like Spider-Man and Arkham even have variants on auto parkour that makes it effortless to cross urban spaces, oftentimes way smoother than Assassin's Creed does. So then what makes Assassin's Creed special? What makes Assassin's Creed special is that the player can move and do that auto parkour with extremely granular precision that games like Arkham, Spider-Man, and such are not interested in providing, because that's not part of their fantasy. Assassin's Creed movement cannot just be a way to get from one open world camp to another, or the end of the one mission to the marker that begins the next. Assassin's Creed movement is meaningful and important to its identity, one of the reasons players buy this game instead of a smoother, better, or more expensively made one. It doesn't matter how good a tool unsuited to a task becomes, it will still be less adept at handling that task than a tool that may be flawed and imperfect, sure, but created for that purpose. We're approaching that moment where the system becomes so perfect, so unable to be improved further, that it reveals how insufficient it is incredibly quickly. What Assassin's Creed decides to do then, and if it even notices, will be really important and interesting to watch. There may be better and smarter answers than holding a trigger on the controller acting as a splitter or modifier, but that is an answer that works. That is an answer we know about, that's proven to be good. And additional development has been made in the modding scene that uses that foundation, that expands on it, improves it, far beyond what the last Assassin's Creed game to utilize it has. This Origins foundation, with the L3 sprint added on top as a cloak to hide its flaws, has nowhere to go. It has no future. A trigger modifier or splitter button has a future that is still being developed, still being explored, expanded, and reflected on by hobbyist, enthusiast modders and programmers even right now. If it's good enough for them, I think it warrants another round of consideration by the brilliant programmers and designers still making Assassin's Creed as well.